another minute to join, and then we'll get started. Thanks. Fantastic. Welcome everyone to our first Global Centre on Biodiversity for Climate online learning event. It's fantastic to see so many of you joining us online for this event. My name is Samantha Morris and I'm a member of the GCBC team at Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, and I'm joined in facilitating this session by my colleague Joanna Lane. As many of you will already know, the GCBC aims to support developing countries to shape decision-making and develop policy that better values, protects, restores, and sustainably manages biodiversity to tackle climate change and poverty. We do this by funding innovative research, and we're working to share our findings and synthesize evidence. We also work to support a global network of research practitioners and policymakers. The GCBC is a UK official development assistance programme funded by the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, or DEFRA. It's managed in partnership with DAI Global and by Royal Botanic Gardens Kew as Strategic Science Lead. We're delighted to have you all join us for this, our first learning event, where we'll explore pressing issues and highlight the innovative research being carried out by GCBC-funded projects. Today's event spotlights 3 projects, all concerned with the sustainable use of marine resources. Our speakers will be Dr. Adrian Glover, Professor Elizabeth Cottier-Cook, and Dr. Isabella Bavolo. So how will we run the session? Each of our speakers are going to present for 10 minutes, one after another, and then we'll move into Q&A at the end. We're hoping for a lively and interesting session, so please submit your questions using the Q&A function throughout the session. I will then facilitate the Q&A at the end, drawing on the questions that you've submitted. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Adrian Glover. Adrian is a researcher in the Department of Life Sciences at the Natural History Museum here in London. Adrian leads the Deep Sea Systematics and Ecology Group, and they have an active research program focused on high-quality deep ocean and polar research, with the emphasis on molecular systematics and ecological approaches to fundamental questions of biology. Adrian is also the lead for the Deep End project, Deep Ocean Resources and Biodiscovery, enabling a sustainable and healthy low-carbon future, which received funding in the first phase of the GCBC. Adrian, can I invite you to unmute yourself and just check that you have control of the presentation?
Yes, thank you, Samantha and Joanna. Hopefully you can all hear me. Someone will shout out if you can't. I don't think I have control, so I'm just going to see if I can fix that right now.
Wonderful. We can hear you loud and clear as well.
Perfect, yeah. So, can I change the slides? That's the next question. I'm just seeing, yes, I can. So thanks very much for that introduction, and also for allowing us to start at the deep end, which I guess normally we start at the shallow end of the ocean swimming pool, but we're starting at the deep end, and that's very kind. And yes, I've been introduced, so there's no further ado. We'll get going, talk a little bit about our project. So often people talk about the other 70% of our planet that's covered by oceans. Of course, we live on a blue planet. I also like to talk about the other 54%, which is the oceans which are deep water. And in fact, 54% of our planet's solid surface is abyssal plain. And you can see that very clearly here in this view of the Pacific Ocean, which is the focus of our activities. And to give you an idea of what it looks like down at the seafloor, 4,000 meters down, right in the middle of that Pacific Ocean that you saw there. This is a view of the seafloor we took just in February this year on a project, part of the Deep End project in some ways, but also mainly funded by the Natural Environment Research Council. It's a cold, dark, inhospitable place. Very, very muddy environment. The biology is present in low abundances, but surprisingly high diversity. You wouldn't think that necessarily from this image. And we're particularly interested in this environment, and you'll see here it's characterized by not only mud, but these unusual mineral accretions called polymetallic nodules, which have been of great interest in the last few years for potential seabed mineral extraction. And you can see that here in this map, which shows the same view, but I've superimposed onto that the Clarion-Clipperton zone, which 20, 30 years ago no one ever heard of, but now it is sort of becoming a little bit better known. And in fact, those red boxes are deep sea mineral extraction contract areas for exploration of deep sea minerals, not yet exploitation. And the green boxes are marine protected areas that we've been involved in advising and setting up over the past 20 years of my research. But the focus of the Deep End project was actually partly in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, but much more focused on the Southwest Pacific, and outlined in red here is the Cook Islands Exclusive Economic Zone. The Cook Islands are a nation state of small islands, and we've been working very closely with them, looking at their own mineral resources, but in particular the biological resources that are in there, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in detail. The Cook Islands Exclusive Economic Zone, to give you context, is about 2 million square kilometers. So it's, I think, the largest area of seabed controlled by relative to the area of land of the nation states. It's a vast, vast region, and most of it is abyssal plain. This is an exclusive preview of a cruise we did last year. It was actually a Deep End project. This is what the seafloor, just a few hours steam actually outside of Rarotonga, the main island of the Cook Islands, looks like. You're very lucky because no one's actually seen this yet. In fact, I've never seen any video of the abyssal plain off the Cook Islands. It's probably the least explored part of our planet anywhere. Southwest Pacific, deep sea, very, very rarely studied. And of course, we were cock-a-hoop to see this because we immediately saw animals, biological activity, as well as nodules. There's an urchin there, and you'll see it's just looping backwards and forwards. There's traces of xenophyophores, these interesting protists, and a coral, a calyptrophora coral growing there as well, just there. So that was a pretty exciting thing, but let's just give you an idea of what the seafloor looks like. And what are we actually doing? So we are interested in some ways the sort of trade-offs between this apparent metal value, the metal value of the nodules themselves, the minerals in our deep sea, and the biodiversity value. And much has been written about the nodules and what's in them, and the cobalt and the nickel and these things. And it's relatively straightforward to work out what the resource value of that is and how it might help to transition to net zero by providing battery metals, etc., etc. That's a kind of fairly well-known discussion and argument, and a controversial one, I would fully admit. The biodiversity value, much, much harder. And on the bottom right there, you can see images we've taken of seafloor images from Central Pacific, all from the Clarion-Clipperton zone. I showed in that map of remarkable animals that live in this environment, taken with photomicroscopes and at sea. So we want to know what's the value of that. This is the arguments about conservation, about how you trade off between one thing and another, require a greater understanding of the value of biodiversity. And to do that, we set up a project, Deep End, which was an early phase project with the GCBC, a pilot project, 2 years long, with these wonderful partners around the world, but with a focus on the Pacific as our international partner. And then this is the region that we're working. I mentioned where the Cook Islands is. This is to give you an idea of the groups we worked with, which was the University of South Pacific, which is a kind of a regional campus, if you like. The main campus is in Fiji and Suva. Collaborators Joape Gingini and Izoa and several other contacts there as our academic partners. And then in the Cook Islands, the government of the Cook Islands with the Seabed Mineral Authority based there, who are responsible for the sustainable development and the exploration and the understanding of the biodiversity in their exclusive economic zone. So a very fascinating group, and we had a pilot project launch in the Cook Islands in 2022, which was a fantastic way to start the project, and very, very successful, bringing people from across the region together. And the project is essentially focused on, yes, I mentioned what is the cobalt, the nickel, the copper, the manganese that's in these nodules. You can read all about that in a few clicks of the mouse. What you'll struggle to know about is what new species live in these regions, what marine genetic resources they may hold, and what interesting natural products they have. And particularly for that latter one, my lab specializes in new species, and we specialize in looking at genomes and genetics. But we wanted to look also at natural products and the chemistry and the potential for novel chemistry and potential for novel solutions to global health problems, such as antibiotics or chemistry which could provide useful things to society. And that's where you start to go from just biodiversity for biodiversity's sake to actually understanding the importance of biodiversity and making those powerful conservation arguments informed by evidence. And I thought I'd structure this on the questions that we were challenged with, because I thought, go against tradition and actually try and answer the questions that were posed by the Q GCBC team. So what new evidence have we produced to support sustainable natural resource management, climate mitigation? So we're super excited that in just the 18 was about 20 months of the project that's run, we managed to complete the first study of abyssal microbes at the University of South Pacific. This is Joabe here, who led that work. We actually managed to get abyssal sediments, which is not, it sounds easy to, well, it doesn't sound easy, it isn't easy, but to get abyssal sediments from the bottom of the seafloor over to the lab in Suva, and they conducted experiments there and found interesting properties, certainly antimicrobial properties in a number of those actinobacteria they isolated. We also, with the collaborators in Newcastle, Kate Duncan's lab, made the first cultures of abyssal actinobacteria. Actinobacteria, I'm rattling through this because there's a lot to get through in 10 minutes, but actinobacteria are one of the main sources of new antibiotics. So these are a bacteria which produce chemicals which eat other bacteria and kill them. And in particular, there's a hot zone for looking for things to deal with hospital superbugs, for example, like MRSA and E. coli outbreaks. And that picture, very beautiful picture in the middle there, next to my colleague Muriel and Darren, who holding a sediment core of frozen abyssal mud, is a culture of abyssal actinobacteria from the deep sea, showing it has activity. And amazingly enough, we also were able to look at one of these bizarre deep sea cucumbers. My colleagues, led by Gangan Preet and Marcel Jaspers up at the University of Aberdeen, able to isolate interesting chemistry from that with activity against bovine mastitis, which is very exciting and currently submitted as a paper in a journal. So already, even though the project's very short-lived, we've got some incredibly exciting results, actually. Wrong button. I may go too fast. Now I need to get back. What innovative approaches have we used? So we're super pleased that this is actually the first abyssal sampling and getting actinobacteria in culture. So we have a methods paper we're writing on that. You can see us taking samples. This was in last February, and then in the year before that, February 2023 as well, with a remotely operated vehicle out in the Clarington zone, freezing those samples, getting them back to the labs in the UK and in Fiji. We've been able to use new samples and historic samples. This is the team all diving into a freezer, bringing samples out to look at. In Southampton, we managed to find old samples that were collected in the deep sea decades or so and bring them back to life and actually culture bacteria from them with interesting properties. And I think the most innovative view is really reversing the argument about deep sea mining on its head. So instead of saying, what's the impacts of deep sea mining, which in some ways relatively tractable to figuring out, in terms of the area of seabed that's impacted, it's the opposite argument. It's what is the value of protecting areas of the seabed? And this is about saying, what is how do you justify creating marine protected areas? We do it because this is the value that people will see from it. And I think that's incredibly important in conservation generally, is to showcase the value of the biodiversity to make that argument. How we involved Indigenous knowledge and local communities. This is completely amazing, but last year in October, we actually managed a short 3-day, it was about 5 days, but including getting out to the sites and back, expedition out of Rarotonga, led by the team from the Cook Islands. I was just there, and my colleague Dan Jones from the National Oceanography Centre. We were just there to lend a hand. It was led by Tanga Morris and John Parianos and the team in Rarotonga, using this relatively small ocean-going ship, and that was really successful and a brilliant pilot. And in fact, that video I showed you was the first video that anyone's ever seen from that seafloor, so it's pretty exciting. We then brought the Tanga Morris, who's from the Cook Islands, on a 45-day research cruise on the Royal Research ship James Cook, and that was February, March this year. Super successful. There's TJ there sieving deep sea mud samples, and the remotely operated vehicle ISIS, our 6,500 meter rated ROV there in the background. And then I think most proud of, we've managed to create this really great collaboration between University of South Pacific and the Cook Islands, working on samples directly between the regulator and the local expertise in the University of South Pacific diaspora. So that was a really great output.
Adrian, I'm going to give you a 1-minute warning.
Yep, I'm almost done. Livelihood benefits: 1.29 million people die every year from antimicrobial resistance in 2019. So this is research that needs to happen. Okay, and that it is critical that we continue to search for new antibiotics. We've got new knowledge on the value of marine genetic resources in PCIDS. There's a picture of the BBNJ, the High Seas Treaty negotiations, which have been ongoing in the United Nations Fora, and led to the new signing of the treaty just last year. And we're evaluating a sustainable approach to deep sea mineral extraction on the Cook Islands, and really informing them and informing the society there, the stakeholders there, on not on what's the value of the minerals, that's already been worked out, but on what's the value of the biodiversity, so that's allowing them to make a sustainable approach to that. And there's a really great paper there by Muriel on the BBNJ work from the project. And it's a contested area, conservation. To understand deep sea mining, we need to understand the value of deep sea biodiversity. This is on that cruise we did last October. This is the first megafaunal sample ever collected, I think, from the abyssal plain of the Cook Islands, it's in the Cook Islands. It's on, people can go and see it there in the SPMA offices. Open communication of the evidence is key. And I think particularly important, I'd highlight work with international rules-based systems such as UNCLOS, the ISA, and the BBNJ treaty. Do not reinvent everything. We started working on UNCLOS in the 1970s, and even before that to some extent. And there are frameworks within that will allow us, to deal and to navigate these contested paths. I think that's incredibly important. Just to acknowledge everyone, it's been an incredible pilot project. We've really got going. This is all some of the people involved, the whole teams, cruises, everything. We've done a lot in 2 years, and I'm not able to mention everyone by name, but hopefully we can get some sense of the size of the project. We're currently without funding, so we are looking for a new sponsor. Please get in touch. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Adrian. That was a fantastic presentation. We're now going to keep going and hand over to our next speaker, which is Professor Elizabeth Cottier-Cook. Liz is head of the United Nations University Associate Institute at the Scottish Association for Marine Science. A marine biologist, she specializes in marine invasive species, seaweed biosecurity, and conservation. Her research currently focuses on developing biosecurity tools and practices to minimize the introduction and spread of pests and disease, particularly in developing countries. Liz is also the coordinator of the Global Seaweed Superstar project, the second of our 3 great named projects, I have to say. The project received funding under the first phase of the GCBC and also won funding for a second phase under our first competitive research grant competition last year. Liz, I think you should have control of the slides. Can I hand over to you now?
Thank you very much, Samantha. I'll see. Hello to everyone out there. It's great to see such a good audience for one of these webinars. So thank you. Yeah, Samantha's already introduced me. So I work at the Scottish Association for Marine Science at SAMS here in Scotland, but a lot of my work through the kind funding by the GCBC team has happened out in Southeast Asia. And I work very closely with the Natural History Museum, but as part of this project, the University of Malaya, as well as other organizations, which I'll touch on as I go through my talk. So to start, really, the vision, the overarching vision for this particular project was to develop a global strategy. So we were really looking globally, although using Malaysia as one of our sort of test cases, as it were, but looking at developing a global strategy that protects, conserves, and restores wild seaweeds, of course, while supporting livelihoods of seaweed farmers in their communities. And you can just see a seaweed farmer here bringing his crop back to land. And if I can, well, there we go. But, you know, lots of people always ask me, but Liz, why are you studying seaweed? Or I meet them in the street and I say, oh yeah, I work on seaweeds. And they're just like, why? And I was like, they just don't, I think because we're here in Europe. I know that I've got colleagues online that from Southeast Asia, which is wonderful. But a lot of people here in Europe really don't get the extent of seaweed cultivation globally and where it happens. And this is just a chart here, a graph that will show you, particularly in the last sort of 20 years, 10, 20 years, there's been a real explosion in the growth of seaweeds. But if you add all of the seaweed growth together, it's around 30 million tons is produced every year. And the majority, of course, of that is produced by aquaculture in low to middle income countries, mainly in Southeast Asia and China. And of course, many of you will have eaten your sushi rolls. You know that they're surrounded by the seaweed here, the Pyropia porphyra and the Undaria, but you may not know that you get seaweed in ice cream, in soya, in toothpaste. So most of you, I would like to think, have used seaweed or a seaweed-based product in your daily sort of morning routine. And interestingly, there's a lot of interest at the moment in terms of packaging. You can see here, this is a food package. So it's cardboard, but it's got a liner. It's got a very thin film in it to make sure that your fish and chips or what have you and your sauces don't end up on your lap, but it's got this waterproof liner made from seaweed. And these were basically used at Wimbledon last year and this year. So all of the food delivered at Wimbledon, the hot food or what have you, went out in trays just like this, lined with seaweed, lined with the seaweed-based film. So it's really important, and particularly, we sort of say there's over 6 million farmers that we are aware of that grow seaweed around the world. So, and as I say, the most of them are in low to middle income countries. So it's really important for us to continue to help these farmers with their sort of income generation. So as part of the sort of first phase of GCBC funding, we were looking very much at how we can try to protect and restore seaweeds, particularly in the tropical, in the euchaeumatoids, the red seaweeds that go on to produce the carrageenan for your thickening agents, like in your toothpaste. So we was, how can you balance, how can you look at protecting these species, particularly many of them are over harvested, and at the same time protect the wild stocks, but also protect the seaweed industries, which are reliant on those wild stocks for genetic resources for new species, new cultivars, as it were. So the highlights from this policy brief that we did and supported by other papers that we produced, was that we very much did see that there is a real need to protect these wild seaweed stocks amid this surging demand, which I've just highlighted. We've found that there is this over-harvesting. We're finding climate change is having a big influence on outbreaks of pests and diseases, which is affecting wild seaweed stocks. We did looking and see about protection measures, really finding that they're very inadequate. We've got a lot of protection measures, biodiversity and things like this, coral reefs, kelp beds, mangroves, seagrasses, but seaweeds are never mentioned, and this is something we want to change. And then we're finding that the conservation measures really should align with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but they do need to focus in on the local community and the seaweed farmers and making sure that they are both together, working together as those key protectors of the wild stocks. So the Global Seaweed Superstar had 4 key goals, looking at protection, improving the strains as well, seeing if we can find new strains from the wild stocks, but improving their resilience to climate. That's one big thing. But then looking at new techniques to restore, innovative new techniques to restore degraded beds that have been over-harvested, for example, and also building capacity. Really important for the legacy of this project is to make sure that there are researchers and local communities in the areas where we're working that can continue the work after we've left. So all of this leading through to something called a seaweed breakthrough. Like, I don't know whether many of you have heard of these ocean breakthroughs that the United Nations are pioneering, and we're helping to prepare the seaweed breakthrough that we want to launch at the United Nations Ocean Conference in France next year. So just to go quickly through each of those sections. So protect. The team at the Natural History Museum, one of our partners, is busy writing what we're calling the State of Seaweeds report. So this is a global report bringing all the information together that we know about seaweeds in terms of the wild, in terms of the cultivated, and that, finding where they're highlighting where there are certain regions maybe where seaweeds need more protection than others, or certain groups that need more protection than others. And that report is going to form the real sort of robust scientific basis for the breakthrough. And that's as I say, it's being drafted at the moment. It will be sent out to review globally to academics and all stakeholders in the seaweed sector. And then we hope to have that launched next June. We're also doing a global review of legal frameworks. As Adrian said in his talk, there's no point in reinventing the wheel. Are there current globally existing legal frameworks out there that we can use? And just, do they just need seaweed adding in, just that one word? I achieved that with biosecurity at a global level, at FAO level. All they needed to change, because it was so focused on animals, on animal aquaculture, shrimp and finfish. We managed to get aquatic plants and seaweeds added there. So we just need to do the same here. So what we've done is we've analyzed over 100 legal frameworks to date. We're finding that 19, I think, are more compatible with our selection criteria, and we're doing in-depth review of those at the moment. And hopefully those findings will be delivered next year at the International Seaweed Symposium in Canada. So this is something, as I say, we just don't want to reinvent the wheel. Maybe we just need some tweaks there. Improving, so looking to build resilience, looking to improve what we're growing already, looking to improve the resilience of not just the cultivated, but the wild stocks as well. And as I say, here we're working with our team at the University of Malaya and working here in a region called Sabah, which is the main seaweed growing region in the country. So working with farmers there to collect carefully collect some of the wild seaweeds that we can find, and cultivating them on the long line structures like the commercially grown seaweeds are cultivated, and seeing whether we have some that are more susceptible to disease than others, some that are more resilient to seawater temperature. And they've really experienced, particularly with El Nino, some really high temperatures over the last 12 months. So, looking at the moment to looking at new ways to try and bring on some of the wild cultivars.
Liz, I'm just going to give you your 1-minute warning.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got various ways to restore as well, looking at different techniques. Quite a lot of restorations happened with kelp and the large brown kelps, but not very much with these smaller sort of red euchymatoids. So looking at various ways in which we can restore, collect the seedlings and then use them for restoration. These are just some of the restoration methods that have been used in previous studies that we're hoping here to adapt to our own seaweeds. And then just building capacity. So we've already had a workshop in Malaysia, a very successful workshop earlier this year. And we hope through whole online and in-person workshops, we've got a big sort of engagement survey work planned for both Malaysia and Indonesia in October. We've got other large symposium, United Nations Ocean Conference that I mentioned is happening next year, and we have an engagement event at COP31 planned. So we're hoping, all the way from the local stakeholders and the indigenous people in the local communities, all the way up to the highest sort of governmental levels to hopefully change perceptions and get that seaweed, the word seaweed, into some of these big strategy documents. So just to finish off then, just to say a huge thank you to all our partners that are involved in helping us reach this vision or meet our key vision. So I'm not going to name them all in person, but just a massive thank you to everyone. And thank you, that's me.
Great, thank you so much, Liz. That was a fantastic presentation, the second of 3 we're going to have today. I'll move on now to our third presenter, which is Dr. Elizabeth. Not Dr. Elizabeth. We've had Elizabeth. Dr. Isabella Bavolo. Sorry, Isabella. Isabella is an assistant professor in the Department of Geography at the University of Durham. She is a hydrologist with a geology background, specializing in both river and climate modeling and monitoring and quantifying physical processes. Isabella is particularly interested in how land use change impacts the climate and how climate change impacts the environment, recognizing that people have a central role in managing their environments. Isabella is also the lead for the Enhancers project, Enhancing Coastal Ecosystem Systems Services, which received funding from the GCBC in our first competitive research grant competition last year. So her project is at the start of its implementation journey. Isabella, you should have control of the slides. Can I hand over to you now?
Great, thank you very much. I think I should have control. Yes, I do. Thank you very much for that introduction. Yes, so unlike the other 2 projects, mine is quite in its early stages. It started more or less at the beginning of the year, running for until around the mid-2026 period. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what our project is doing at the moment, rather than the results. It's dealing with coastal protection, biodiversity and ecosystem services related to mangroves rehabilitation in Suriname and Guyana. And for those of you who need a reminder, it's on the northern coast of South America, just north of the Amazon basin there. So it's a very flat area. There's a lot of, it's a very dynamic system. There's because of the flatness, mangroves do have a massive part to play in coastal protection. And there is a lot of erosion happening, a lot of flooding, coastal flooding, and you can see in the top right diagram there some of the erosion that's taking place next to one of the Hindu temples there, site of cultural interest there. So obviously that threatens a lot of the populations and property in the area. There are solutions that people have been debating. Some of the solutions include a sea wall, such as the capital city of Georgetown has in Guyana. That's very popular, but of course that has its own issues. They had to raise it recently because of sea level rise, for example. It's very costly. And there are the more natural solutions, if you like, regarding mangroves, where you can, for example, just plant them and hope they grow, or like they do in Suriname on the right-hand diagram there is using sediment trapping units, and this is trying to stabilize some of the soil to be able to rehabilitate some of reinstall some of the mangroves there. But both of these techniques and others have mixed success. What is really needed here is some data. What works, what doesn't work, what are the conditions these kind of rehabilitation programs are working under, and what is the best way of thinking about coastal protection strategies going forward for long-term need and to enhance biodiversity, etc. And what is the best way for building consensus on that? So the aim of the project then is really to develop capacity, knowledge and consensus for this decision making and action amongst the multiple stakeholders. And there are a lot of stakeholders, from government to local communities to NGOs, and for really thinking about mitigating coastal erosion and flood risk in these 2 areas. We have been fortunate enough to get a lot of support for the project. So the Guyana Forestry Commission's involved. They're interested in using mangroves within their RED Plus programme, but they need to identify where they are, how many of them are, and how they change over time. We have the National Agricultural Research and Extension Institute. They're dealing with mangrove rehabilitation programmes. In Suriname, we have the Ministry of Public Works, again dealing with coastal infrastructure, the Ministry of Spatial Planning and Environment, also dealing with mangrove rehabilitation programs, IDB, Conservation International, etc. All of these are involved, so several stakeholders. So I'll give you a quick introduction to some of the components. We have three main objectives. One of them is really building upon prior work, and we're really aiming here to refine and operationalize some of these novel techniques that we've started to develop through our pilot projects. And these are really thinking about using drones and satellite images for identifying mangroves and their mangrove trees, but particularly the different mangrove species. So we're quite interested in where they are, how they change in relation to their changing environment, how many of them are there, so what types of mangroves exist. This area has three, very easy to start with just three, some areas have a lot more. You know, how many of each type of mangrove, what is their health, how do these change over different periods of stresses? Do some species manage to cope better than others? Are there better species that we can introduce to rehabilitate the area quicker? Are they better long-lived than the other species? And so the species-specific question is quite important also for thinking about carbon sequestration potential and that kind of thing. So we've been doing a bit of work previously. We've collected around 800 leaf samples and taken spectral reflectance measurements from this. This basically means that we shine a very powerful light at the leaves and recover the reflected wave spectra here. So you've got the, that splits it into its light components. And from that, we're able to get intensities of the different wavelengths of light that are reflected back off the leaves. And from that, we're hoping that we can actually use machine learning techniques to discriminate key wavelengths that will allow us to identify the three different mangrove species. And from that, we can then use some lenses that we build that we can for filtering out all of the other wavelengths except the wavelength of interest. So we can use those wavelengths, put it on the bottom of a drone, and then fly that drone around to be able to identify the different tree species at their individual levels. And ideally that will help us map and identify these and keep an eye on them over time to show how they change and how they react to different stressors. So this is just, I don't expect you to see all the detail here, but really this is just to show you that we have had quite a good success identifying the three different species. We can identify them with quite a good accuracy using 6 to 11 spectral bands, slightly less accurate using a narrower range of wavelengths. And this is doing quite well. So this is where we're going. We can also, quite interestingly, have a look at some of the satellite products. They have a less range of spectral bands, but we can use some of those and get quite good accuracy as well. So we're hoping that from the local scale, we can upscale that to more of a regional scale using the satellite imagery, and actually build like a tool that people can use, that governments can use, and use that to just look at environmental change over time. And this is just a little video of the Hindu temple I mentioned earlier and the changes in the coastline from 1984 to 2022. So there's a lot of dynamic change in this area, as you can see, and that will allow us to go back in time and look at some of the changes. Of course, one of the really important things here is to observe the current climate, the environmental monitoring, the ocean variables, with traditional instrumentation, and look at that in combination with global climate model data, what's happening in the bigger global areas, Why? It's because really we're trying to generate that new understanding on the site and storm-specific thresholds, which lead to tree mortality and environmental change on the ground. And we're really looking to understand what kind of combinations of meteorological and ocean parameters can really cause that environmental change, and can mangroves withstand and recover from these events? What are the differences over coastal areas or over time? And we've got a whole set of kits that we hope to install, and we are currently install some of it about 4 kilometers offshore. That's where we can guarantee around 2 meters of depth. We have all sorts of instrumentation here to measure wave current and direction, turbulence, but also water quality, I guess, parameters to understand, is it, you know, more ocean, marine ocean salinity water? Is it coming in from the Amazon? Is it more fresh water? So we've got salinity, conductivity, temperature, those kind of parameters. Near shore, we have things like the weather stations. Again, we're interested in wave height and period. We've got various other instrumentation there, really to understand how those ocean parameters change coming onshore. And then we have, of course, our general monitoring as well, making use of whatever other data is available. So our global climate observation systems, drones, satellites, etc. The final objective of the project, I think, is really what brings them all this data sets together, and it's really about sharing that new knowledge and building consensus. So as I mentioned at the start, there's very little data available for some of these processes, and there's different opinions about what works, what doesn't work. The communities would very much like a seawall wall now, because it's going to protect their land. You know, the government are thinking more about the cost and looking forward to ecosystem services and enhancing those. And what we're trying to do here is build consensus and share that new knowledge using a gamification platform, which will actually be co-developed with local stakeholders. And this is really about sharing knowledge, generating debate, and giving equitable voice to all stakeholders for driving that decision making and action. We've come to the understanding, you know, that different stakeholders have these different points of view and perceive coastal flood risk in different ways. And like a game board, which this will be, it's actually been shown by a lot of research to bring people together, to make them understand the issues a lot in greater depth than normal. And they can step into each other's shoes, if you like. They can become a decision maker within the game, or something else, and basically get to grips with some of the data sets, really work with it and think about what might the future look like using these techniques. So that's the end of the presentation, and I'll just leave up my contact details as well to also acknowledge the great team that I work with as well. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Isabella, for that presentation. I was about to come in with your time warning, and then you finished right on time, so thank you. Everyone who's on the line, please join me in thanking our 3 speakers for their presentations. It's a challenge to pack so much into such a short time. So thank you, everyone, for doing so well with that. We're now going to turn to our Q&A, and we have around 15 minutes. As I said at the start, we're hoping for a lively and engaging session, so please get in the Q&A function and continue to keep your questions coming. We're going to keep our speakers on their toes with the Q&A to make our way through as many questions as possible. To get people started, though, I want to begin with a question that we had when we were pulling this session together. You've all touched on or alluded to some of the contested elements of marine conservation in your presentations, as well as the contested notions of what sustainable management and use of marine biodiversity looks like. I wanted to give you an opportunity to reflect on how that element of contestation played out in your projects, maybe offer some reflections that others on the line might find interesting. Adrian, would you like to add anything to what you already included in your presentation about this topic?
Yeah, thanks, Samantha. Yes, it's a good question, and I alluded to some of that in the talk, but not enough time to go over in detail. So deep sea mining is a topic which has caused a lot of interest and from a whole range of stakeholders, from the sort of industry side to the NGO activist side, and I guess as scientists we sort of sit in the middle of that, providing evidence. And you know, my mantra has always been that we provide the evidence within the international rules-based system that's been set up after 20 or 30 years actually of discussing this. What's interesting in the context of the deep end is, of course, here we've got Pacific small island developing nation starting down that path on its own in its own national waters, which has never happened before. So that's quite a new thing. And it has, there's many concerns, of course, but there's also tremendous opportunity to kind of get things right in a way that they weren't necessarily all got right under the law of the sea treaty and the creation of the seabed authority. So that's a really interesting thing. And so it's been really valuable, I think, working with partners there, going out to the Cook Islands, we're going out again in September, learning what their concerns are, what kind of scientific evidence they need to make, their society's decision. And I think that's been a really great learning experience, showing the importance of evidence, of scientific data. I mentioned that one little animal that we collected. So that is now, it's on the shelf in the government department in Rarotonga, and you can go and see it, because in that same department, everything else is about the nodules and the minerals. It's very rare that you'd also get the sort of biology on display. And that's a critical sort of pathway that I think we can help with, is getting people aware of what biodiversity and what that they have on their doorstep in their deep sea, which is historically really hard place to get to. But of course, the way we got there was, of course, using an industry ship. There's no other. The Cook Islands don't own a deep ocean research vessel. There's a Cook Island company which was set up by one of the contractors that's put a ship there, and they are very open and transparent. We want the ship to be used by Cook Islanders to do research with international colleagues, provide that evidence, provide that data. So there's lots of doors open and lots of really good communication going on. I think it's actually a really great example of where a nation is really coming to grips with that decision, which they haven't taken yet. They're still thinking about it. So it's been a very positive experience.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adrian. That's a really interesting example of how that plays out in your project. Liz, did you have any comments you wanted to make?
I think there's something that I alluded to in my talk, was that there has to be close collaboration. There has to be ties. We need the seaweed farmers in Southeast Asia, need them to be the ones to look after the wild stocks. There's no sort of them and us. There's no sort of, they have to work together. The conservation, there are a number of marine protected areas in and around Sabah, but there are some of the areas that actually allow seaweed farming to happen within the conservation zone. But because some of these seaweed farms happen, they're incredibly remote areas, and the governments themselves don't have the resources to enforce conservation measures or no-take zones or what have you. So I think it has to come from the farmers themselves, and they have to. And for us, it's about sharing with them our knowledge of how important it is to protect those wild stocks, because if they don't protect the wild stocks, as I said in my talk, there won't be any new material that they can bring out or use or domesticate for their farms later on. But we are going out there in October, November to do a big survey, speaking to all the relevant stakeholders of seaweed farmers in Malaysia and in Indonesia, to actually find out, well, what is their current knowledge and how do they feel about conservation and protection of these wild stocks, and what do they do at the moment. There's maybe some really good practices that we don't know about that they're already doing to protect those wild stocks. So we're out there later this year to do a little bit more research on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz. Isabella, I'll come to you for your thoughts as well, but there's also a question in the Q&A for you, so maybe I'll hand that to you as well, and you can do two in one. The question for Isabella is it possible to determine mangrove health using drones and satellite data? So take your pick, which one you'd like to answer first.
Okay, I'll go with the contested areas first, and it is a very contested area on the intertidal area along the coastal strip in Guyana and Suriname, I think everywhere. Of course, there's landowners there, there's protected areas. I think in my case, I think it's very different. Guyana and Suriname, the populations there have different experiences in coastal protection, and it's nice to be able to share those avenues between the different communities there, and to think about what might work better. Now, some of the farmers we've spoken to, some of the areas, they've already cleared behind the mangroves, and now it's been inundated and they've lost that land. But then the question comes to where, where are the coastal protection going to be installed? At the moment, there's temporary dikes on their land, which they obviously can't use, but they're paying for rented areas that they no longer have, and they're underwater. So it's quite an interesting dynamic. And there's a lot of different ideas about what could and couldn't work. So it's very, I think, one of the things we were trying to do within this project is bring those people together through this gamification platform, and actually have that discussion and understanding where you kind of level that out before you kind of make the decisions based on actual evidence. So yeah, that's quite exciting. But to answer the question on the mangrove health, it is an issue. I think it can be done. The mangroves basically, obviously, like any tree, it will have leaves, and when they start to feel the effects of some ill health, they tend to go more yellow. What we are trying to do is separate some of those reflectance data, so also identify some of the more stressed leaves as well, which we had within those 800 leaf samples that we had. So yes, it is possible, I think. Also visually, they're very much more yellow, and also then they start to lose the leaves. So even from the drones, you can definitely see areas where they're starting to have tree mortality, and you can see huge swathes of pooled water, which leads to potentially that mortality. On the satellite images, you have the image, we have the problem of scale and resolution, but I think you can make that association over time. You can start to, with ground truthing, allow that to happen. So hopefully that's answered some of the question there. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Isabella. We've got a question that's come through for Liz. Liz, have you seen any impact from the scheme on local communities and the potential for it to act simultaneously to aid poverty alleviation? I guess that's your work with the seaweed farmers.
So sorry, can you just the first bit, the impact of the scheme? I wonder what.
Yes, impact of your project.
Oh, impact. Oh,
Yes.
Impact of our project. Well, our project only started, this particular part of the project only started in January. So we've had one sort of capacity building session in Malaysia in June, early June, and everyone was very interested in what we had to do, and they were going to go back to their respective departments or government offices or what have you and discuss it with their team. They're obviously excited to hear more about how we potentially will restore some of these degraded seaweed beds, and a lot of the farmers are very interested in hearing more about our results from these sort of producing these more climate resilient strains, because they are finding that with these sort of peaks, these heat shock events that are happening to the commercial varieties, they're just quite interested to know whether or how the work's going on finding new heat or temperature tolerant strains. So I'm sorry, we're still in the very early days of trying to figure things out, but thanks.
We will absolutely have to come back to you to find out more as your project moves on. Adrian, I can see you're answering questions in the Q&A, which is tech wizardry that's beyond me. Is there anything you'd like to add in response to the questions that have come through for you in the Q&A?
No, I thought I'd start answering just in case we ran out of time, but they no, some really good questions there on what next. Obviously, it's a pilot project. We've got the partners set up. We've got the preliminary data. But in science, it is a long game, and I think that's something we have to, acknowledge. These are quite short-term projects, they're quite rapid and really successful. It's about seeing that through to outputs and engagement with stakeholders. To give you a reminder, the Law of the Sea Treaty is decades in the making. The BVNJ Treaty started 10 years ago. So the scientific projects, they need to be, continuously providing that information all along, and that does require long-term funding. I think that's something that GCBC needs to probably think about. I had a great question about, how you value biodiversity, and I think that's, a question of right across science and or biodiversity science, and something we've wrestled with in the climate debate. It's relatively the IPCC and the climate action, all these things, relatively tractable to deal with climate as a sort of physical problem. Here's a a greenhouse, you add this chemical, we do this, blah, blah, blah. As we always say, there's no point in fixing the global climate emergency if in the process you concrete over the planet, reduce biodiversity to zero, right? The whole point of this is you have to find ways to maintain biodiversity, maintain ecosystems, at the same time as transitioning to net zero. And that's where, deep sea mining, the interface is right there. And it's really hard. One of the reasons we went into natural products, we just want to show people, the medicines that we use, the food that we eat, everything comes from biology. Okay, it's just sometimes it needs, you need actual concrete examples of that. It's not biodiversity. Although 193 nations signed the Convention on Biological Diversity, which recognizes biodiversity intrinsically as important, we still need to show how critical it is to find new things that also solve society's problems, as well as inspiring us about the world around us. It's not easy to put numbers on that, but we have to try.
Thanks, Adrian. I think we'll bring our Q&A to a close there. I was hoping to have more time, but we are fast running out. So thank you to everyone for the questions you submitted and to our panelists for their answers. As I mentioned at the start, this is the first of our learning event series, and so it's fantastic to see the interaction that we've had during the session. Also fantastic to hear from 3 very different projects, but all of which touch on those elements that are so critical to the GCBC's vision and interest area, understanding the biodiversity that exists, understanding its role and its potential uses, and making that evidence for decision making available to policymakers, practitioners, and just people whose livelihoods depend on that biodiversity. So I think we covered a lot across a really diverse range of projects. So please join me again virtually in thanking our 3 speakers, Adrian, Liz, and Isabella. It's only fair that the last word should go to the presenters, or the second to last word. I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to just quickly say, if people wanted to find more about your work, where can they find it, or where should they go? Isabella, did you want to go first?
Sure. We're in the process of setting up some media websites and things, other social media, but we haven't quite got there yet. So the best way is to contact me directly at the moment for updates, and I will add you to a potential mailing list.
Fantastic. Liz?
Yeah, we've got a website. It's www.globalseaweed.org. Please take a look and feel free to contact us, superstar@sams.ac.uk. Thank you.
Fantastic. And Adrian, anywhere people should go to look for you?
Yeah, just Google NHM Deepend. That will take you to the website, and you'll get everything you need there. So NHM Deepend.
Perfect. Thank you to all of you. And thanks to everyone else who has joined the webinar for spending an hour of your day with us. We hope you enjoyed the session and found something in our speakers' presentations that sparks a little bit of curiosity and thought that will flow into your work. If you want to learn more about the projects you've heard about today, in addition to where our speakers have mentioned you can go, you can also jump onto the GCBC website to learn more about the innovative research we support. Our website is gcbc.org.uk. You can also sign up to our newsletter or follow us on social media. As I said before, this is the first in a series of learning events that will explore the challenges and opportunities for innovative and transformative research, policy, and practice at the intersection of biodiversity, climate, and livelihoods. We hope to get some feedback from those of you who joined us today on what worked well in this session and what you'd like to see more of in the future. But keep an eye out for our next event, and we hope to see you there. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.